welcome to the 2021 International eConference on the Historical Jesus. Now, today's theme, with the exception of a couple of presentations, is all about a discussion on what's known as Jesus Mythicism. My name is Dr. Darren Slade, and I'm the president of the Global Center for Religious Research, which is hosting this year's academic conference. And one of the great things about GCRR is that you're being joined by students and scholars and specialists from all over the world, right from the comfort and safety of your own home. I want to remind everybody that there is a downloadable PDF file that was created specially for you and this conference by the Scholars Choice Organization. So 4 separate book publishers, including Baker Academic and SBL Press, have given each of you a special discount code up to 40% off to use on books related to the historical Jesus. So all you have to do is go back to the GCRR website, go back to the Historical Jesus event webpage, and click on the Scholars Choice logo that's near the top of that webpage, and you'll be able to download the PDF. And the last thing I want to talk about is the Global Center for Religious Research has established the most comprehensive international research group to study the causes, manifestations, and treatment options for those suffering from religious trauma. The GCRR has built a team of approximately 30 licensed psychiatrists, therapists, sociologists, university researchers, religion scholars, and PhD candidates from all over the world, most of whom specialize in the field of trauma research. But we have a really big problem. See, in order for victims of religious trauma to receive help, we need to arrive at a place in our culture where religious trauma is accepted as a real mental health condition. And unfortunately, the academic study of religious trauma remains in its infancy when compared to other studies in mental health. That means there are no exhaustive empirical studies to support what we've all experienced in the tens of thousands, that religious trauma exists and is a chronic problem in many religious traditions. So as it stands, really only anecdotal case studies have been published, but nothing substantially empirical. And GCRR intends to correct this gap of knowledge by offering an interdisciplinary and scientific examination of religious trauma. And we're hoping to get your help in supporting this project. We've set up a GoFundMe page in order to crowdsource the world's very first comprehensive sociological study on those traumatized by religion in order to help set the stage, the foundational data from which other researchers and counselors can build on in order to get people who suffer from trauma the help that they need. The reason we've set up a GoFundMe is because, unfortunately, all federal funding to mental health research has come to a screeching halt. And so that's why we've turned to the public for help. All you have to do is go to GoFundMe.com and search the phrase religious trauma sociological study, or you can click on the link that I'll put in the chat box here shortly. And so with that said, I would like to introduce you to my friend and our next presenter, Dr. Raphael Lataster, and allow me to share my screen so I can give a proper introduction. So Dr. Lataster today is going to be talking about responses to critiques of Jesus' hyperskepticism. Now, Dr. Lataster holds a PhD in studies in religion from the University of Sydney, and he lectures there and other institutions. His main research interests include the philosophy of religion, Christian origins, and alternative God concepts such as pantheism and pandeism. He is an unabashed agnostic atheist and enjoys discussing different points of view. You can learn more about his research and his work and his current projects at raphaellataster.com. That's raphaellataster.com. All right. With that, sir, you have the floor.
Hi, everybody. And thank you, Darren, for allowing me to be here and speak at this conference. I have not a PowerPoint presentation. I have a Word document I'll essentially be reading for. It's very flexible. I've got a bunch of people that I've written responses to, and we can chop and change throughout. If you don't want to talk about someone, we can skip over that, or if you want to focus someone else, we can we can do that. Like you might have heard about one person's responses, for example, so you don't want to hear more about that. Can everyone hear me okay?
You are loud and clear.
Yeah, okay. I find it interesting when someone you've never met before, someone you've never heard speak before, suddenly you're in a conference with them and you think, oh my God, that's what they sound like, what? So I'm sure some of that's happening right now. Before we get started proper, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Hector Avalos. As you no doubt know, we lost him recently. And he was very, very important for our thing, if you can call it that, whatever this is. And he had a big role to play in my career. He was one of the examiners for my master's thesis, and also for one of my he was one of my PhD thesis examiners as well. And you never officially know who acted as a referee for your articles, for peer-reviewed articles, but I'm sure he would have popped up once or twice there as well. Otherwise, I wouldn't been able to publish things, I feel. So he was great for a lot of this stuff. When it came to skepticism about Jesus, he himself was an agnostic on the historical Jesus, like some of us here. I'm technically agnostic on the matter. I lean towards mythicism, but I'm agnostic. And he also was great for the God issue as well. He did dabble in philosophy of religion, and he debated William Lane Craig as well, one of the highlights or lowlights, however you might see it, of his career. Someone else I wanted to mention as well, we lost him a few years before, Phil Davies. So Phil Davies, most of you would know, legitimate New Testament scholar. He was more open to these sorts of discussions, Jesus hyperskepticism. And just a few months before he died, I was in an email discussion with him, and he revealed to me, you might have already known this if you've read my book, but I think only 5 people have read the book. That's questioning the historicity of Jesus, QHJ. And I mentioned there that he actually was agnostic before he died. Phil Davies came out to me as agnostic on the matter. So I've shared that in the book. I felt funny about sharing it. I wanted to share the email with you too today. I feel funny about that because, he's passed away and we don't have the ability to ask his consent. But at the same time, I sort of feel, well, there's no harm now. No one can censor him now. Because he's no longer working in the field. But so I was going to show you for a brief second his email to me where he basically said he's agnostic on the matter now, but I see it's recorded, so I'm not going to do that. But if you like, I can read out parts of the email. Would you like me to do that before we get started?
Why don't we, when we get to the end discussion, you can maybe kind of work on that. But if you want, go ahead and start your presentation, and we can revisit the email thing at the end.
Yeah, it's very quick. I was asking him about the prospects of writing a book on mythicism and more from the agnostic perspective, and he basically said no. Maybe he was worried about how it'd be perceived, but he made some interesting points about how agnosticism is not particularly an attractive option. It doesn't get people riled up, doesn't encourage people to buy a book, which makes sense. You love Trump, you hate Trump. What about people in the middle? Yeah, we're not interested in that. So I get that. But in passing, he actually said, I'll read it out to you here. There's not much need for discussion of popular books that people can just read and assess for themselves. While agnosticism is indeed a very sensible conclusion, and then in brackets, and it concurs with my own, end bracket, it does not tend to excite people, whether scholars or not, very much. So we're not sure about either an academic or a lay readership. Now, as you know, I ended up publishing this book through Brill. So that was interesting. Instead of through Equinox, through Brill. No diss on Equinox, but Brill is one of the top publishers, especially for arts and humanities. So that worked out pretty well. And what we have here was a legitimate New Testament scholar, even more important, saying that he is agnostic on the historical Jesus. And I don't think he made that public. And then, he's passed away. So Yes, Carrier, brilliant major. I see your comments here. Yeah, one thing I wanted to say about these comments is the book is available, but it's crazy expensive. I don't know what to do about that. Eventually, I would work on a popular version again of all this stuff. So we'll get there eventually. But I also have the the free articles as well coming out. Okay, well, let's get started. As I said, I've got a bunch of people here to trash. No, just kidding. I got a bunch of scholarly responses I wanted to address, and you can give your feedback, yell out as well if you want to maybe focus on someone else, because we have limited time. I've got a bunch to deal with, and especially towards the end, if we have people I didn't mention, let me know, because I haven't found a lot of reviews for my book. I think it's probably because hardly anyone's got the book. And same with Carrier's book. I don't find a lot of reviews of it from people that you want reviews from say New Testament scholars who either love the book or are trashing the book. I'd love to hear about it and create more responses to responses. I think the most high profile one that we have is the article by Golotta, and I find that fascinating, because would you consider Golotta a scholar? He's more someone that came from Australia, went to America, made friends with a lot of the anti-mythicists there, and managed to get a response piece published in a major journal. It's not a particularly good response piece, and I don't think he's particularly a good scholar. I am familiar with him. I have had some dealings with him before. We can talk about that if you have questions about Golotta. But I think that's the only one that really is relevant. Simon Gathercole partial review, yeah. I don't think we've had something like Golotta, a proper response piece published in a major journal. I think that's the only one we've got, and it speaks volumes about the field, about the Ehrmans of the world, that's what we're going to get, and that's all we're going to get. I think that's very interesting. Ehrman, for example, taking himself out of the discussion, and we'll talk a bit about Ehrman as well. All right, so let's get started. I wanted to share with you some of the scholarly responses to my book and also Carrier's book. So Carrier's book, I'll call it O-Hodge, on the historicity of Jesus. My book, Questioning the Historicity of Jesus, QHJ. These books are, as you'd probably know, probably the most significant books. No offense to anyone else who's had books, but in terms of them being academic monographs, they're published. We did the things that you had to do to reach out to scholars, and if you then don't get attention, well, that's kind of out of your hands. But yes, Carrier's book was the first in over 100 years to be published on this topic with a proper academic press. And mine, the second. Of course, mine is Brill, just saying. So yeah, we've got here the two books published in more than 100 years, and they're both from the more skeptical side. We don't really have a proper book like that from the other side, from the historicist side. The best we've got there is Ehrman's book, which, as most of you will know, is pretty ordinary. It's not a proper academic book. You can question if he even wrote it, or if he shipped it to his undergrad students or something, because it's very poor quality. It's hardly referenced. The references are pretty bad too. The referencing, I should say, is pretty bad. I use his own references against him, like when he references Josephus. Yeah, so O-Hodge and QHJ, very, very important books for this movement, if you can call it that. I don't know what to call it, subfield. And hardly anyone's touched it. So I think that's very interesting as well. I think they make great points, obviously, and they haven't really dealt with the few people that have touched on these books, as you'll see from the responses we'll be talking about. They focus on tangential issues. They focus on issues that don't really matter, and they focus on things that aren't even in the books, or complete misrepresentation of what the books say. All right, so let's get into it. The first one I have is Christina Petterson. Especially I love talking about the Aussies, especially because I am Australian. So Christina Petterson is from Macquarie University. One thing, I know we shouldn't be poisoning the world, but let's do it anyway. One thing about Macquarie University I find is they have an ancient history department. So you think, oh, well, that's legit. They have a pretty big ancient history department, and it's filled with conservative Christians. So I don't know what's going on at Macquarie University, but I'd be very cautious about their arts programs and their ancient history department, filled with conservative Christians, including John Dickson. Some of you might know John Dickson. He was a scholar that came out swinging really hard against me when I had my conversation piece, which was republished in the Washington Post, and he made himself look pretty bad. There were scholars, Australian scholars, even on his comment section that were calling him out for the way he spoke about me, the way he treated me. And one thing he said was that I wasn't a scholar, and then a few years later I have the PhD. So it's really dangerous saying things like that. And yeah, he's in the ancient history department, and he's written a book about the resurrection of Jesus, how that's happened. So you already have an idea then of what kind of a scholar he is. And he's from the ancient history department of Macquarie University. Now, Christina Petterson, also from Macquarie University, from cultural studies. Wow, great field, cultural studies. And published in Religiaire, that was in 2015. It's worth mentioning because it's one of the few pieces from scholars about our work, and it's mostly about Carrier because I hadn't published my book yet. And it's actually quite confusing. It starts off without a proper introduction. It does mention Carrier's book, so she's obviously read at least a few sentences of Carrier's book. She focused on Carrier's figure that Jesus's probability of existing is less than 1 in 12,000. She completely ignored that Carrier actually argued a fortiori and concluded that the figure is actually 1 in 3. That's what Carrier stands by. It's about 1 in 3. She ignored that completely. She focused on the 1 in 12,000. So the attempt straight away is to portray Mythicists as completely crazy. You can't justify this stuff. He actually could, but he stood by 1 in 3. So it's very dishonest. And this is what eventually happens, is that you get this cherry picking of things that you can more easily tear down. It's like a straw person, and you ignore all the other stuff that was far more reasonable. Now, sometimes cherry picking is necessary because you're dealing with a 600-page book, or Carrier's actually an 800-page book with his big preface before it, proving history. Sometimes it's necessary. You can't talk about absolutely everything, but something like that is glaringly obvious as being very intellectually dishonest. Petterson actually says in her article published in Religiaire, she actually admits that she's uninterested in reading Carrier's book and uninterested in reading his lengthy explanation about what she called Bayes' theorem. Of course, that's Bayes' theorem. So this, you think methodology is really important, and here this scholar responding to this book just says, I'm uninterested in his methodology. I don't need to know about that. So I think it's so bad, it's funny, I think. And she had trouble remaining objective as well, using terms like Carrier's personal crusade. If she knows anything about Carrier and myself, we don't particularly care about this topic. We don't really have anything riding on it. If anything, talking about this is bad for our careers. I was just speaking with Darren before about the problems I've been having now, especially with the coronavirus. I've lost an overseas job opportunity that I was accepted for thanks to our lockdowns. And my studies in religion, at the University of Sydney is being closed down now as well. So it's tough, and especially it's tough for scholars when you have a very fringe position like this one. So it's not really good for our careers. So it's strange to think that this would be a personal crusade. And to further poison the world, she focuses on how Carrier apparently portrays the early Christians as schizophrenics. He didn't do anything of the sort. I do that more, and I don't do that either. So it's simply not true. Carrier was talking about people being schizotypal. That's not the same thing as people literally having a mental illness. So very dishonest stuff from Petterson. It continues on like that. Now, moving on from that point, Peterson talks about Carrier's use of rank Raglan hero-type. I think pretty much everybody gets this wrong. We don't need to go in detail about every single time that somebody gets this wrong. I think what I'd like to say about that is we're dealing here with prior probabilities. So two things there. One is that a prior probability is not a judgment about the whole probabilistic case. Okay, it's a piece of evidence here. It's a reason to be skeptical. It doesn't say this proves the case and there's nothing more. There is something more when it comes to the historical Jesus. When it comes to the God issue, that something more is really important. It's the more direct evidence. And you'd hope to have something really good there, whether you had a low prior or not. And it turns out we don't. Of course, we would all know by now with all the other talks you've had and just who you are. I see some names here that I'm familiar with in the people coming through. Obviously, you know, the direct evidence for Jesus is really poor. I mean, even the opponents here, the historical Jesus scholars would have to admit to that one. The evidence is really bad. And so it's also the case with the God question as well. The direct evidence, I'll just admit someone in to the room. Yeah, the direct evidence is really bad for the God question as well. So the prior is not the be all and end all, but they like to focus on it. They like to say, oh, he's done this wrong. And that's easy to do because no one's heard of rank Raglan. Who knows about that? Another thing to say about the rank Raglan issue is that Carrier has actually put people in there that were historical people. So they're really misunderstanding the point of it. The point of it is to say that not everyone who fulfills these criteria is a person that didn't exist. This will apply to some historical people as well. Okay, and that's why it's not become a case of Carrier saying, well, because Jesus ticks these boxes, he definitely didn't exist. It's no, here's a number we can use, right? A number like 1 in 3, like 2 in 3, because that's what you see when you apply these historical figures along these criteria. The majority are fictional. Some of them turned out to be real characters. So yeah, huge misunderstandings from Peterson and others like Gulata on the rank Raglan issue. So we don't have to really address that again. Peterson also objects to Carrier's charge that many experts are unaware of all the relevant evidence. But on this, Carrier's right. I mean, it's very sad, but the vast majority of New Testament scholars aren't even aware of the intertestamental literature, and certainly not the bits that we've been focusing on the past few years. So that's absolutely correct. A lot of the so-called scholars of the New Testament haven't even heard of some of these books. They don't know what the hell we're talking about. Such as you see with McGrath, has no idea what we're talking about when it comes to sky demons. So we'll get back to that. He thinks, wow, that's some weird conspiracy theory. So we'll get back to that one as well. We'll mention McGrath. We have to. How can we not? So Carrier's absolutely right on that. And it's sort of in the name as well. New Testament expert. They're not necessarily going to be expert on things that aren't in the New Testament. So a lot of New Testament experts have no idea what's in the Old Testament. And as we know, for people that have read Carrier's book and my book, it's kind of important that you know a little bit about the Old Testament. And it's very important that you know a little bit about the intertestamental literature as well, the books that came in between. When I was a Christian, I wondered about this topic. I wonder why these scholars aren't, whether they're Christian or not. I wondered, you know, the Old Testament ends there and the New Testament starts here. You've got about 400 years. What's happening in that 400 years? Did Jews believe the exact same thing for 400 years until Jesus came? And yay, now we have Jesus? Of course not. We know by looking at the intertestamental literature that Jews are up to a lot of stuff. And they always were up to a lot of stuff. They always were changing the religion. I teach on world religions. I teach on Judaism and its origins as ancient Israelite religion and its origins before that as Canaanite religion and Mesopotamian religion. Judaism has changed constantly. You know, every few centuries they have these massive changes going on, and that fits quite nicely into study on mythicism today and the focus on the celestial Jesus theory. That fits quite nicely into that. There's a lot of experts of the New Testament that know hardly anything about Judaism. Even Bart Ehrman, esteemed Bart Ehrman. I've just written a book review about Bart Ehrman with another scholar, and I praised him. He's a wonderful scholar when it comes to most of the topics. He forgets that he's a wonderful scholar when he talks about this topic. We'll talk a bit about that. His book, Did Jesus Exist? But in Did Jesus Exist? Indeed, he referenced Josephus a lot, and he uses Josephus numbers, and I use Josephus numbers, the same ones that were used by Ehrman, to show actually you're completely wrong here. We have no idea what the majority of Jews at the time thought. We don't have their writings, like 90-something% of Jews, using his own figures that he grabbed from Josephus. So it's very, very common that New Testament scholars, they're not aware of anything outside the New Testament. They're not aware of the Old Testament, intertestamental literature, other contextual literature, or even basic historical facts as well. So, and that's fine, they're focused on certain fields, but maybe then, and I make this point in the book, maybe they're not the ideal people to talk about this topic, funnily enough, right? So anyway, getting back to Pedersen, while she may find that boring and pointless to look at, contextual history, Carrier specifically took his time explaining all the important background information. Absolutely wonderful part of Carrier's book, that one or two chapters at the start that takes hundreds of pages, all the background information, wonderful stuff. I use that quite a lot in my my Jesus course at Sydney University. It's wonderful stuff, and the vast majority of those bits of background information, most will be unaware of, most people, and even most New Testament scholars. So I recommend look at that stuff, look at those intro chapters to Carrier's book. I mean, it's worth it just for that alone. That's gold there. It covers stuff like what Jews actually believed around the time of Jesus and before Jesus. There were Jews that believed in basically a celestial type Messiah. So this is the stuff you need. This is what scholars should be looking at. So yeah, Pedersen's kind of criticizing Carrier's work here for being really thorough, which is very childish and unscholarly and counterintuitive. You should be praising the person. You can't win with that. You can't win. Sometimes people will say, well, I can't read this book. It's too dense. It's too thorough. It's too detailed. It's worthless to me. It's all Greek to me. I can't do anything with this. So you dumb it down for them, you summarize them, and then they say, well, I mean, there's nothing here. It's just so broad. There's no detailed points here. How do you justify this? How do you justify that? How do you justify that? Well, maybe you can read my 800-page book or books on the topic, which they refuse to do. So very interesting there. Now getting to Pedersen does actually raise Carrier's 33% prior probability when she's talking about the prior probability for Jesus' historical existence. So 1 in 3 using the rank-Raglan archetypes. Pedersen actually says that Carrier is strictly correct and then offers no argument against it. So I apologize for appearing a bit jovial about this and a bit flippant about it all, but it's laughable. It's laughable that this is the sort of response we get to our serious work here. The way we're speaking here, the way we speak to each other in person is not how we write. We write very scholarly. We use the evidence. We very logically. Everything's done properly. Everything's done rigorously. And then you see a scholar do something like this. Say, well, yeah, they're strictly correct, and then offers no argument against it and moves on. Right? So what does Pedersen do? She complains about this. This is a direct quote. She's complaining about the numbers and the statistics seem like a diversion or an illusionary tactic which intentionally confuse and obfuscate. You can't win with these people. You just can't win. You've done the right thing. Carrier's done the right thing here. Something that historians rarely do. They actually think in a transparent, probabilistic way, and try and use some numbers, which is very brave to do, and you just get criticized for it. Like that's a diversionary tactic. It's just, you can't win. It's extraordinary. So it's very uncharitable. It's very unsophisticated. Carrier has been very open about what he's doing, very transparent. It's a wonderful piece of scholarship, and you get comments like that. You just, what do you do? What can you do? You just have to try and reach more people, I guess. So there's many things on which Carrier can and should be criticized, but his commitment to transparent method is certainly not one of them. That's beyond ridiculous. So moving.